You're listening to the Mark Bradford Alchemy for Life podcast.
Do you know what a liminal space is? Well, hey there, welcome back. Normally on this podcast, we jump right into the subject matter. I mention the subject matter, and we jump right into it. It's something I like to do. It's a much more efficient use of your time. And if you're like me, you may actually find it a little annoying when someone mentions a subject that everyone's heard of, and then they just start to define it. And you're like, I know what that is. I know what that is. Why are we talking about it? Right? But today's subject is a little different. You may not have even heard of this. Liminal spaces. So if you have heard of it, I'm still going to discuss it in a way that you probably haven't heard of. But if you haven't heard of it, let me explain what a liminal space is. It's a space usually in the physical world, save for later, in which it's sort of in like the in-between world. But the way to really think of it is basically it doesn't feel right. It's kind of creepy. You know, so like, for example, a mall, a big mall, all the lights are on and everything's fine, but no one is there but you. It's completely empty. Or imagine you go somewhere where there's a big indoor pool and the indoor pool is also devoid of water. Do those hit home with you? I mean, the definition of a liminal space is basically that it's just on the precipice of becoming something different, but, you know, it's like between worlds, right? Like a break room or a waiting room in like a doctor's office, or really a waiting room anywhere, can feel that way because it's transitory. To me, I don't really think it qualifies enough in liminal space in the way my mind sees it. I mean, a waiting room isn't creepy. I mean, an empty waiting room really isn't creepy either. If you're like the first one there, you kind of feel like, yay, I get to sit where I want. I mean, they also say that like stairwells are that way, but sometimes people are in stairwells and sometimes they're not by their nature. So I wouldn't say those are liminal. A house that's sort of been prepped for sale. So if you go to look at a house to buy, you know, some of the things that they sometimes do is they take down the pictures and they take down everything that kind of made it like a home instead of a house. And it can kind of feel weird because you can still tell that people live there, but it's getting ready for people to not live there. And you're sort of imagining, could I live here? Would my stuff look good with the rugs and so forth? If you think about it, you can probably come up with a lot of liminal spaces. In fact, your brain may have a category for all these spaces based on like the creepy factor, but you didn't have a label. Now you have a label. But there's another kind of liminal space that most people don't really think about. And it's not a physical, but an emotional or intangible or experience liminal space. So it's not a room you can go into, it's something that's happening. And again, it has a lot to do with something that's sort of not quite right or on the precipice of change. If you've ever gotten married, then you know the night before that is a weird night. Because you're not quite single and you're not quite married. You're as non-single as you possibly could be without being married that night before, but you're still not married. Another one for me is if you're going to take a plane soon. You can't get comfortable. You know you're going to be at the airport in just an hour or two, and everything is just sort of fading away because you're like, I'm going to be hundreds of miles away in a short period of time. This is going to be a memory in a second. This is part of my vacation that's not part of my vacation because I'm not doing anything fun. I can't because I know I have to go have a stressful plane ride soon. And regarding the waiting room physical space that I don't think is liminal, I do think the experience is that way. I mean, if you're in a waiting room for a doctor, even if it's just a checkup, it can feel very liminal. It can feel very transitory and strange, especially if you're nervous, especially if you have the white coat syndrome where your blood pressure and everything else is up because you just don't like going to the doctor. No offense to doctors, but a lot of people have that. It can be even more so if it's a waiting room that you have to wait in because a loved one is in surgery, or there's something going on at the hospital, so you need to stay there for a long time. or you have to keep returning, which, God forbid you have to deal with that. But that can also feel very liminal because it's not a space you're supposed to feel at home or comfortable at, but you have to keep returning. If you've ever worked in retail or somewhere where where you're just slogging it and you get this standard 15-minute break sort of thing, and even more so if you happen to be a smoker, if you go outside of a building and you sort of lean against a certain wall and have your cigarette, and that's where you have your cigarette and your phone call or whatever, and that continues to be where you do that, and one day you don't work there anymore and you pass by that spot, that can feel very liminal because you're just passing it by, and it used to be a very spot where you always felt a certain way. And speaking of where you used to work, just visiting where you used to work can feel very liminal, just like your last day, just like the last day of school. I have very intense memories of the last day of school where the weather was warm and the teacher certainly didn't want to do anything because what was the point of that? And y'all just sort of sat there and waited for the clock to run out. I mean, that can be very odd. Even a movie theater in which all of the lights are on at like maximum brightness can feel sort of odd. And it doesn't as much as when they start to dim or your movie's starting soon or they're going to at least run 8 million ads for you. But if you're there exceptionally early, it can feel a little bit like that. Even your own home can feel liminal if you have to go home for a reason that you hadn't planned on. You forgot something or you had to stop there or whatever, and you have to bounce in and bounce out. But you have so little time to get what you need to get. You can't look around. You can't check the faucets or the toilet's running. But you just kind of run in and out like it's almost not your house, and it just feels sort of odd. It can feel that same way if you have people living with you, kids, spouse, so forth. They're not there, but all their stuff is scattered around because they just left recently. And as on the one side it was, if you've been married, you may also have been divorced. There are a lot of pieces and parts of divorce that feel very liminal. I mean, living with somebody that you're not going to be with anymore, that you may not even like anymore. That can feel like a very odd experience. They're not going to be living in your house much longer. They're basically a stranger, or you're a stranger, however that works. If you're someone that did the 50-50 thing with your kids as someone who's divorced, the days when they're not there can feel very liminal, or maybe they feel perfectly normal. And again, liminal in the way that I'm talking about it now is an experience. It's neither good nor bad. And as I always do, I bring awareness to something, but you're going to say, okay, Mark, you spent most of the time on awareness. Now what? Like, you always give us this thing to do, this thing to, attack it from a certain angle, fix something, whatever. In this case, it's not about fixing. It's just mostly giving yourself the awareness. I mean, we go through life with all these tasks and rules and accomplishments and so forth. I guess I'm saying stop and smell the liminal roses. I mean, it can be a really weird experience, but it can make you appreciate what you consider in your brain to be quote unquote normal. And then you consider, well, why? Why is this normal? You can imagine that I think this is a really important thing to do. I mean, it sort of recalibrates you, but it also gives you an experience that is really amazing. And just having the awareness of the fact that it's that way for everyone, right? That everyone has this liminal concept in their mind. And that maybe you just thought, well, you know what? I know you're going to find this is weird, but XYZ creeps me out. Well, of course it does. It's a liminal space. So, happy adventuring forward and looking for or remembering liminal spaces. Don't stay in them too long, especially the emotional liminal spaces. But enjoy them. And I hope you don't mind that I went off my standard practice. But this was fun. Thank you. Hey there, thanks for listening. You know I always enjoy your feedback. The prequel to The Sword and the Sunflower duet, called Upside Down, is now available. The Sword and the Sunflower is available as Kindle, paperback, and audiobook, with the other two, Amira and Upside Down, being available as Kindle and paperback. Well, actually, all three books are now available in hardcover.